Now let's bring in our analyst who joins us all the way from Ghana, Fidel Amakia Owusu, who is an African affairs analyst. Thanks for joining us. You've been following developments regarding the issue of the Israel and Hamas war. Now, let's get to South Africa's involvement in all of this. And a couple of days ago, we were giving updates regarding what's going on between the diplomatic relationship between the two countries. Now, my first question to you, Fidel: does South Africa knows what is at stake with this case at the World Court?
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Firstly, I would like to say that the International Court of Justice, based in The Hague, is an avenue that was created as part of the UN system to allow states to take other states or to redress their grievances against other states. So in the International Court of Justice, only states can take other states to the place. And so the decision by South Africa to take Israel or to sue Israel in the court is in order. It is nothing out of the ordinary. However, for Israel, this is unprecedented because ever since 1948, since the state of Israel was created, this is the first time it has to answer for genocide. And for Israel to agree to go to the court to give an answer is also significant, despite the inability of the court to enforce its ruling. Whatever that will happen will be very notable and significant, despite it being not so consequential.
Now, Fidel, when you look at Israel's reactions to the allegations, and of course, earlier today, they of course gave their own plead to the case that has been brought to them at the World Court. Now, what's your outlook on what's happening?
Yeah, so South Africa has said that Israel has engaged in genocide. It has killed about 23,000 people since the declared war on Hamas in October 7th. But Israel, as part of its argument, it has not started with its arguments on the floor of the court. However, what we are picking is that Israel wants to argue on the principle of self-defense, that the massacre that took place in 7th October only requires the measures that it has taken so far to respond to Palestinian militants and terrorists. So that is firstly the point. Again, Israel is also accusing South Africa of double standards in that South Africa is not suing Hamas for committing genocide in killing about 1,200 people on October 7th. However, South Africa has decided to rather sue Israel for its response. So this is the line of argument that Israel is taking. And Israel feels that the Rainbow State should not have tolerated sentiment, but rather look to the merits of the case, that Israel was provoked in retaliating or in what the operations it is carrying out in Palestine or Gaza.
Fidel, a lot of us are asking the question, what does South Africa stand to benefit from this?
For a long time, South Africa has identified itself with the struggle of the Palestinians. That because South Africa experienced apartheid government since 1948, so it ended in 1994, the ANC also had a lot of moral support during the time from this Palestinian Authority, especially from Yasser Arafat and other leftists around the world. And so, as a matter of principle, South Africa has continuously, in fact, Mandela condemned Israel's relations with Palestine. And so it is more of part of their history. They feel that they had experienced what the Palestinians are experiencing, even though personally I feel that there are two different situations, but many in South Africa feel that, or the South African government feels that whatever the Palestinians are experiencing is what they have experienced. So largely it is based on historical precedent or historical antecedents, and the experience that South Africans themselves had, or the majority blacks in South Africa had. And as I've said, while the parallels may not be so clear, that is the feeling among South Africans or among the elites in South Africa. And that is why they are pursuing this. That is one. Two, again, in the 80s, 70s, Africa actually sanctioned Israel. That when Israel took over in the 60s, yes, especially in the 60s, when Israel took Sinai Peninsula, many Africans boycotted Israeli goods and services and actually had a diplomatic fracas or pursued diplomatic isolation of the state of Israel. And so this is not the first time Africa is taking sides. However, currently, many African countries do not approach the Israeli-Palestinian issue with the same unanimity that they have done in the past, because it has religious ramifications, it has political ramifications, and issues of security. For instance, many states in Africa have security relations with Israel. And so when these things happen, they are not able to take the size of Palestine as they used to do. And so this makes it complex. And for South Africa, it looks like they want to be consistent with the idea that everywhere people must be free, and then this two-state solution must be adhered to.
Fidel, still talking about the benefits that South Africa gets from this case, could it be as a result of the upcoming election in South Africa, given the current political crisis in the ruling ANC party?
Politicians have different ways of playing to the gallery or gathering support for themselves or behind them. Now, if you ask me, I would say that South Africa has so much internal problems to resolve than to maybe pay attention to external ones. And for instance, economically, South Africa is not doing so well. Now, it is the third largest economy. And for a long time, it was the first. Now it is the third. Nigeria is number one before Egypt and then South Africa. Others are closing in on it. Again, domestic growth has really been stunted. And the internal divisions within the ANC has been unprecedented. In fact, for the first time, the ANC is likely to face real opposition in the next elections. And in fact, if care is not taken, they are not going to have that kind of absolute majority that they enjoy in the South African parliament. So if you look at it, then it will look like the government must concentrate on doing its core work within the country. But that does not also mean that we are going to deny South Africa of its international obligations and its principles if it believes in them, that perhaps they believe that the two-state solution must be in place and things like that. So in as much as we look at the domestic challenges, we may also look at the fact that perhaps South Africa is only doing what historically it feels right, and in principle, it feels right to do. But apart from that, we see so much problems within the country, both at the individual levels, the clash between Jacob Zuma and Ramaphosa, at the institutional level, ANC and other opposition parties, including Maleme's party, that has said that it is open to forming an alliance with the Democratic Party, which has never happened because the Democratic Party seems to be more liberal and a little bit pro-white. And so for Malema to say that, it means the ANC has real challenge to face. And as you have mentioned, sometimes politicians would like to play the outside game in order to garner domestic support behind them. But as to whether this will turn out the way the ANC wishes or Ramaphosa wishes is another matter to look at.
Now, Fidel, there's been a lot of celebration over South Africa's move with this case. Now, let's be rational. A lot of people on social media are praising the move, calling, South Africa a superhero. But do you think in the midst of this excitement, the general public, talking about public perception, are people really aware about what's at stake between these two nations? Let's take away the sensationalism that has been put forward by the liberal media and most foreign organizations, and even South Africa itself in the stance that a lot of civilians have been killed from the sides of the Palestinians without fully knowing what's the case that Israel is bringing to the table regarding this war.
If you look at the social media aspect, now opinion polls are not necessarily social media, because now we know that trolls have been hired, people have been hired to be on social media by political parties. Political parties actually pay for social media presence and contributions and things like that. It's happening all across Africa, including Ghana. Sometimes you see a news item and you find a consistent comment, coming from different people. This is a cooperated or coordinated effort to influence public opinion. However, that's I'm saying, they do not really represent opinion polls on elections. There are people who may support what South Africa is doing at the international court, but will not support South Africa's domestic policies and will therefore vote against the ANC. So we should somehow separate what people think of the Israeli-Palestinian issue as people within South Africa and what is likely to be their political choice when it's time to make them. And that will also be important in the sense that South Africa is a very complex society. We have a burgeoning middle class, and the middle class is often more sophisticated than people who are mostly not educated in many African countries where people will just vote because of their ethnic allegiance and all that. Now South Africa is becoming more sophisticated. People are living beyond the Mandela era euphoria. People are now questioning the sanctity of the ANC, corruption issues, mismanagement, and things like that. And these were things that were not so pervasive when Mandela was alive. Now, post-Mandela, ANC could face a lot of challenges despite its presence in the International Court of Justice in The Hague and whatever argument it is making.
Now, let's talk further. In terms of how Israel could plead its case as it did today, how do you think this will shape the public perception about this war?
So, firstly, people might have thought that South Africa would have gone to the International Court of Justice, ICC. But the technicality is that Israel is not a signatory to the International Court of Justice. Unfortunately, Israel is not a signatory to the International Criminal Court, but it is a signatory to the International Court of Justice and its provision in 1948 on genocide. Yes, which means that South Africa only had a choice in going to the International Court of Justice. However, this also gives Israel the opportunity to make its argument. And one of them, as I've mentioned, is that Israel is going to use the self-defense principle that, well, we were attacked on the 7th of October, and we responded by invading Gaza and making sure that the war was against Hamas and not the Palestinian public. On the other hand, South Africa is arguing that, look, 23,000 people will not all be Hamas people. These are children and civilians, and then they'll provide videos. And in fact, any video that South Africa will provide will not be novel, because we have all seen it in the media that people are dying in Gaza. But the situation is more complex than that. And in this conflict, the people are divided. International community is divided. Even in countries where Israel does not really have so much support, like the Arabian countries, governments in these countries are divided. Some have questioned the role of Hamas leaders who live comfortably in Qatar while controlling the militant group in Gaza. And the ramifications of their actions is being faced by the people while they live in luxury in Qatar. These are Middle East or Middle Eastern government that are not in support of what is happening in Gaza. They feel that the Hamas has manipulated Gazans so much, and what happened in October 7th was an unnecessary provocation. So Israel will still have a case. And in any case, as I've mentioned, this case cannot lead to any consequential effect on Israel, except that it is going to be symbolic. For the first time, Israel has been charged with genocide. And we know the kind of situation that had facilitated the creation of the State of Israel after the Holocaust in the Second World War, when Hitler decided to annihilate about 6 million Jews, and that had, even though the Balfour Declaration had happened decades earlier, the genocide or the Holocaust really facilitated or led to the speeding up of the creation of the state of Israel. So if Israel itself is being accused of same, then it creates some moral challenge or moral questions for the country. Apart from that, I don't see this leading to anything changing with Israel.
Of course, Fidel, you earlier mentioned that this is not the first time that we've seen a case like this. Recall when Israel and Russia, I beg your pardon, Russia and Ukraine had to go to the World Court, to talk about Russia seizing fire against Ukraine. Now, it did not lead to anything. So if it does not lead to anything, talking about the decisions of this court, if there is no way to enforce the decision of this court, and just like you have said, that is being symbolic, but it's been symbolic enough to make sense of the proceedings and the judgments that will come out of this court.
Yes, so as I've mentioned, it is symbolic. There are many things that we do that does not necessarily lead to anything significant, but symbolically, it has happened that South Africa was a country that took Israel to the International Court of Justice when people, they accuse Israel of killing civilians in Gaza. So the consequences or anything changing on the ground does not necessarily mean that whatever is happening is not symbolic. It is symbolically perhaps good for South Africa that they are taking this decision because they feel that morally and historically they identify themselves with the struggles of the Palestinians. Debate later. However, as it stands, it looks like South Africa is not backing down on this course.
Fidel, I want to ask the question, what is the next move for South Africa if they do not win this case?
What is working? What would mean for this to work out? What it would mean is that the court will say, well, Israel has committed some genocide in Gaza. That is one outcome. And when it happens, the court doesn't have the power to enforce its ruling. That is what I've established. It doesn't have the power. In fact, in the past, the ICJ's ruling has been ignored by many. Unlike when it did in the Bekasi Peninsula between Nigeria and Cameroon, where Nigeria accepted that Bekasi Peninsula should go as the ICC had ruled. And so in this case, I always praise African countries when it comes to adherence to ICC or international court rulings. Not long ago, the dispute between Ivory Coast and Ghana over some exclusive economic zones in the sea, the ruling went for Ghana and Ivory Coast agreed. So that was good. But in the case of Israel and South Africa, I don't see Israel agreeing to anything that the court will say or changing anything significant to what the court will say. So as I'm saying, these are symbolic things. We all do symbolic things. There are certain things you do yourself that are not necessarily significant, but symbolically it is good for you. And so this is one of the things.
Fidel, finally, before I let you go, what do you make of the judges and how independent are they likely to be in adjudging this case?
Frankly, I have not looked at the judges because I'm telling you, coming from Africa, I believe that when international judges from the international courts are ruling, I don't have anything to fear because it is quite difficult to manipulate such judges because mostly they think about their reputation and they know that whatever judgment they give is going to be landmark. And the reasons they give for their judgments, unlike in some African countries where judges just rule and then when you go to read their judgments, it's often contradictory with their ruling and so much confusion. Over there, people would like to leave a mark. They would like to be remembered by history or in history to have done the right thing. So I see that wherever they are coming from and the ideology, I don't really mind. But definitely I'll go to look at the merits of the case and perhaps come out with a judgment that will legally seem rational. But as I've said, as to the consequences, the court doesn't have the power to actually change anything on the ground.
Thank you so much, Fidel Amakie Owusu, Africa Affairs Analyst, joining us all the way from Ghana. Thank you so much for your thoughts. We'll take a quick breather. When we come back, we'll come back to Nigeria and talk about the state of our politics. Quite a lot of dynamics that's ongoing. Move aside the court judgment for Kano, Plateau, and some other states that happened today. We will talk about all of that later on another episode of Politics Now. But when we come back, we'll talk about the state of politics in Nigeria. Just stay with us.